Good morning. I want to welcome members of the media this morning to this press conference. I have with me members of the National Trust Administration, Mrs. Patricia Bradley and Ms. Christine Pineda, and we also have with us Mr. Edward Howard from the National Roads Authority and Minister Tibbetts. And we are delighted this morning to be able to announce that we have reached an agreement with the National Trust and with the developer Ironwood and with government regarding the proposed route of the road, the extension of the east-west arterial from its junction with Newlands Road or Hurst Road up to Frank Sound. As most of you will know, there was some controversy, some concern about the proposed route of the road. And we have managed to reach an agreement which I think everyone is happy with. I'm going to let somebody else besides me actually go into all of the detail, but in broad strokes, the arrangement is, we believe, capable of dealing with the concerns which the National Trust had, the concerns which the government had, and the concerns which the developer had. The concerns of the trust, which I will let them go into in more detail, were really threefold. The edging effect of the road. Edging effect is what occurs when something like a road goes through a major ecosystem. And the concerns about how much land was going to be left to the south and whether or not that would impact adversely the ecosystem, which the Mastic Trail is a major part of. There were also concerns about the loss of land. We believe that the agreement that we've reached now with in respect of this will minimize the loss of land. And I'll let them go into those details. And government will also give a parcel of the property near the trailhead of the Mastic Trail that belongs to the Crown to the Trust to help compensate for any loss of the land. And access to the Mastic Trail will actually be improved. And a proper trailhead can now be established, giving residents and tourists better access to this historic landmark. Government concerns had been that if the road went too far south, it would infringe on the residential subdivision or subdivisions in that area. And there were also concerns about drainage for the area. So we had to find a balance, be able to strike a balance, and we believe that's been done. The agreed corridor will leave enough land on the southern side of the road to allow for natural drainage area and a buffer zone from the subdivision while maximizing the National Reserve to the north. There were also concerns expressed about the continuation of the east-west arterial all the way through to East End and its impact on the Salinas Reserve. And government has given a commitment that when this is built, the road will find a route which least disturbs the ecosystem in that area. And so I'm not sure whether Mr. Howard will be able to demonstrate that with the map that he has, but we'll see the projected course of the road through to East End, winds its way around the Salinas and the National Wilderness area. As far as the developer is concerned, they are happy with the proposed route. It doesn't do violence to the plan which they're operating on, because as I've said before, their whole project was designed around what was the gazetted course of the road. So we believe we've struck a happy medium, and that the project will be able to go ahead. Government is satisfied, the National Trust is satisfied, and indeed, I'll ask Mrs. Christine Pineda now if she would speak on behalf of the Trust and express their view about the arrangement that's been reached.
So the Trust is very pleased that the government has indeed listened to our concerns in relation to the East-West arterial negotiations. We enjoy a good working relationship with the government, and we note that this administration has been particularly supportive of the Trust in regard to this and other projects. Just to touch briefly on our concerns, we were concerned initially about, in addition to the points that the Premier mentioned, we were also initially concerned about the road cutting through a vital portion of wetlands contained in the Mastic Reserve. And these wetlands essentially feed the rest of the dry forest. So the fact that we've been able to avoid much of that wetland is actually a big success story. It's really good for the integrity of the rest of the forest. We've been able to find a way forward that is more acceptable than the previous proposed route through the Mastic Reserve, which minimizes habitat loss in the Mastic, as well as the Salina and Collier's wilderness reserves further east. It is heartening to know that the government sees the value that our reserves bring to the community and country in the form of the tourism product that it promotes, as well as preserving our natural heritage for future generations of Caymanians. We've also met with a developer who has made certain commitments in relation to helping us develop a parking lot and proper trailhead, and those things will be worked out, finalized in due course, but we are happy that we've met with all parties concerned. So we're very pleased with the outcome, and we do thank the government for working with us on this. We also would particularly like to thank the Minister Tibbetts and his ministry for working so closely with us on this and including us on negotiations. I think this is a very forward thinking step on the part of government. We congratulate them. We also thank the NRA who's worked with us. So we thank you all.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pineda. Minister Tibbetts, since you were the driving force behind all of this, I think it's only right and proper that you say a few words.
Well, there's not much left to be said after all has been said before. But I want to say a very special thank you to the National Trust for being willing to sit and talk the whole thing through, because, as I said from the beginning, understanding and accepting that there perhaps were some difficulties with the original route which was gazetted. It was simply, I guess that's easier said than done when I say simply, but it was just a matter of sitting down, seeing where all the concerns were and trying to determine what was the best way. And most times there is a way if we're willing to listen to each other, and this is a typical case of that. The NRA also worked very closely with the National Trust, because I believe when we made our first announcement, between then and now, there probably were 15 or 20 different maps drawn, trying to look at various alternatives until we got around to the best one, which was going to give us the best result all around. And just to quickly mention now, the continuation from Frank Sound up through to East End. And if I might just include both Newlands to Frank Sound and then from Frank Sound to East End. When these corridors were gazetted, it is just like the beginning of any plan. And most times when you get down to physically going to do the work itself, you always end up changing something on it. And this was a typical case, because it was obvious to us when we looked at what was gazetted that perhaps there was thought given as to what was the least costly way to build, that is making sure that you avoided as much of any wet area as possible. But at the same time, in looking just at that, you may not have been careful enough in your look-see as to what other effects you may have. So I think the one going from Frank Sound to East End will face the same situation that this one has faced, and we'll simply work through that, or whoever is there at the time. I don't know how long that one is going to take to be looking at, but certainly I am sure that the path that we have chosen now will bode well for the National Trust in the future whenever they're negotiating with the government in regards to any future building of roads. Premier, Edward, you want to chip in here from the NRA's point of view, so that you can perhaps, and if you need help with that map, just let us know. If you want to show the media exactly what has been done.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just wanted to apologize. We don't have the nice video, the monitor that we had last time around. So Mr. Howard will have to struggle a bit to show you the changes using one of the paper maps.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add, just to echo the sentiments of the minister and the premier, was that basically whenever we do these sorts of road plans, it's sort of par for the course where we do start at an overall alignment and then negotiations pursue, and then we get down to sort of the intricate details and so forth. And this is sort of what we've done in this instance. And so we're pleased from the NRA perspective that we really haven't lost anything in terms of the value of the road that we were intending to deliver to the country. So we're getting the adequate number of lanes that we feel will be necessary and the alignment and everything. So really there has been no loss in that regard. And so we're quite pleased that we were able to work along with the National Trust and come to a compromise in that regard.
Perhaps if you just want to show the map
Yes.
Yes, I would like to show.
so they can see how you ended up. Roy, if you could assist, and then perhaps Edward
So-
could just hold the mic and talk it through.
And so very, very,
Edward, I'll hold it this side.
okay, perfect. Thank you.
That might help a bit.
You can perhaps pull the mic out, Edward, and just, if you have to refer to it. It doesn't hurt, just pull it.
Okay. Yeah, it's stuck in there. Okay, so what we're showing basically is two main alignments, and we haven't shown all the iterations. As the minister said, there was probably about close to a dozen different iterations before we were all said and done. And even when we met the last time, we had already started to do realignments at that point because we had previous meetings with the National Trust as well. But basically where we've come from is what's shown in the yellow, which may be difficult to pick up on camera, but we've come from that then to what's now shown in the blue. So you can see there has been considerable compromise in this area here, which is quite a bit of, as you mentioned, quite a bit of wetland area that will be avoided. As you can see, it comes fairly close to a residential subdivision there, but we will look through engineering means and so forth to try to minimize the impacts on that residential subdivision.
Perhaps, Edward, you could just show where the National Trust, the one place I believe where National Trust might actually lose property, and then you can show where they will gain.
Yes, okay. And so, Christina, you can help me with this a little bit. I believe that in this area here, then you would lose a little bit there.
Yes.
And that's going to be the buffer for the subdivision.
And that'll be the buffer for the subdivision. And I believe then
Down below.
in here,
Yep, right there. That.
yes, so you will gain in this area as well. Of course, that has to be done through different types of means, land acquisition means and so forth. We'll sort that out and see how that can be done legally so that they gain that area as well. But basically this shows, the compromise or the agreement that we've reached in all of our negotiations of late.
Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Yeah.
We're now happy to take questions. I would be
Just a quick clarification, the pink,
Can I
Edward,
speak?
the pink is just, it's non-existent, that was another plan, is that correct?
Oh, yes, the pink, as you recall, when the road actually did come to this point, last time we mentioned that we looked at two routes, and we're still sticking to those two routes. One will actually head in a direction heading to the Moritz, because we want to be able to provide access in the future for any sort of development that occurs on the northeast coast around where Moritz and so forth. And if we look at some of the zones in the northeast coast, what we call the Queens Highway and stuff, a lot of that is zoned for beach resort, residential, and could be upzoned in the future for hotel tourism and everything. So we definitely want to keep that route open. And then the other route, which is sort of the pink, will then go in a southerly direction then to satisfy any future development in and around the Shetty Hospital and so forth, and the High Rock area.
And that ends out between the high school and the fire station? Is
Yes,
that
it
good?
does.
Okay.
So it's just,
And that's not going to be built during this phase? That is projected along later on?
Correct.
Okay. Just double checking. And
Unless you have some money.
no, not that much. And so the other question I have is, the NRA is going to build this road, and the funding will come back in the end from the developer.
all of those details are being worked out. But so that there is no wrong impression created, let it not be thought that somebody else is going to come in and build a road and the NRA is going to be twiddling their thumbs. Not going to be anything like that. It's just that the developer, as far as we can see now, will be taking the vast majority of the risk with regards to financing of the project. The NRA will be intricately involved. Of course, it will all be local expertise and businesses used to actually construct a road along with the NRA. Because even if it was an NRA project, solely NRA, you would still be using private sector to either supply aggregate or heavy equipment work or actual paving, with some assistance, because the NRA wouldn't be able to do the whole thing on their own. So it's going to be a very similar situation, except the developer is going to be involved at the top end to ensure, because of the FFR, and once we can reach agreement with the UK as regards the methodology and the process involved, then we'll be able to proceed. But the NRA will be intricately involved in the entire project.
Speaking about cost, ballpark figure, do we know how much this is all going to cost? We were given a figure before said to be largely paid through concessions given by government to the developer. Have these changes affected what that cost is going to look like?
Edward could be specific if he wants to do any more than I'm going to do now, but I do not think so. Because if you look at what was and what is, if you look at the blue and you look at the yellow up top, you're perhaps going about the same linear distance, except you're doing it on the belly instead of the back. If you look at it, you see one curve goes up, the other one comes down. In other words, 2/3 of it is the same corridor, or 3/4, I should say. It's only the very last lap of it from where the roundabout is going up there that actually has any major change. So I don't foresee any changes in the cost.
So how much are we looking at?
The ballpark that we initially looked at when all of the suppliers of aggregate were put together and looked at rock bottom prices was about $40 million, including financing. That's what we looked at initially. Of course.
And that includes any land acquisition that needs to happen and that kind of thing?
No, that does not take into consideration land acquisition. And most times when you look at, when you consider those figures, you don't. Because it is difficult to foresee compensation, because, for instance, the majority of those parcels from Newlands coming into Frankstown, through which the road will traverse, are large parcels of land. And in many instances, it will enhance the value of the land, at which point in time there should be no compensation to the landowner. So it is not that we don't have that into consideration, but I don't think that that is a major factor to have to put it alongside of costings right at this moment.
Will the financing for the road and compensation all be coming from concessions? Or will government be contributing to this road up front as well in some ways? I mean, obviously government pays for it in the end because it pays for it via the concessions. Right. But what are we looking at? Because obviously this development, if it happens, is going to be, as you said, over a very long period of time. So either
it's being looked at over 15 years, but the financing will be 20-year financing. So it's not that all of the money has to be paid for by the time the road is built. As the development continues, so too will the payments for the road. But it will be not a government loan, but it will be a loan directly by the developer. Does that help you, Wendy, or?
So essentially, I just want to try and get my head around this so I can understand it properly.
I really want you to too.
Period,
Sorry?
Over a 20-year period, you're saying?
Yeah, that is what.
The developer's going to pay for the road. So the stuff that the the equipment, the building, the physical building of the road will be paid for by Ironwood up front.
By way of a loan.
And then gradually they will recoup that 40 million via whatever concessions you all come
And
up
that
with.
40 million is supposed to be including the finance charges. And there will be concessions, and they're approximate at this point in time of somewhere between 20 and 25 million dollars. There are also developments which may well take place between the corridors, which will involve the road going through some of those developments. And those, for instance, and please don't ask me to be specific because I cannot at this point in time be specific. I'd love to be. But some of those proposed developments have actually come forward and said, listen, if it's a mile of road through our development, we'll pay for that. See what I'm saying?
So what would be essentially, because you're saying 25 million from duty,
Mm-hmm.
50 million is going to come from lots of different places.
That's right. But it's not something that is needed to be found immediately because there will be 15 to 20 year financing on the actual road itself.
So you're talking about similar arrangements with different developers then?
Sorry?
Are you talking about similar arrangements as this
Well,
with different developers?
I was a little hesitant to mention. It's not that I don't want to mention it, but it's just that we don't have anything concrete. But there are a couple of developments who have come speaking to us. They're in the process of land purchases and that type of stuff. That's why we're not that far on. But they have said to us that once we get through with what we have planned, then the section of road that will be going through our development, because it will enhance our development and we will build our plans around that road, we will certainly pay for the cost of that section.
Okay. So there's a 15 million shortfall currently until you've negotiated those other deals there, right?
I don't want you or anybody else to try to lead me in a direction that I'm not going into. Where is the shortfall coming in? The developer is getting a loan to build a road. After that, the guaranteed payment is by way of concessions which they would have gotten anyway. And instead of them getting those concessions, the value of those concessions will go towards the repayment of the loan. Forgive me, I'll back up, okay? But it's just that when you said shortfall, I started seeing all kinds of question marks in mind. So the $15 million that we speak of, and that's in general terms now because we don't have precise figures, that $15 million will be paid for during the course of the 20 years in ways that perhaps we're not even 100% sure of yet. But in any case, if government were building the road, and if we put in our budget 3 years down the line, $1.5 million or $2 million towards the east-west, the extension of the east-west arterial, and that would go towards the loan. You might well see that happen in a budget. But it doesn't mean that the government is going to find the $15 million specifically from government coffers to pay the balance.
Right.
But it could be that some of it is paid for in that fashion. It just depends on all the factors that I mentioned earlier on. That's not good enough. No, I'm asking. No, I just
No,
because I want
whether
I
it's
want
good
it to
enough
be
or not.
clear
Just trying
because
to
I don't
be
want
clear
something printed now that is twice or 10 miles away from what
25
the
million
meaning
covered
is.
for the
So
time
sorry.
being. 25 million is covered for the time being,
That is again we're using
Guaranteed.
approximate figures, right?
and then the 15 million, you'll get to that.
Your worst case scenario, if we're going to be plain practical about it, your worst case scenario is over a 20-year period. The government and the country will have the benefit of 10 miles of new road, creating all types of development on the Eastern Front, increasing government revenue by way of stamp duty, land transfers, and properties, and all of that kind of stuff. So, I mean, besides the benefit to the people who live in the Eastern Districts. So in other words, there is every justification building the road outside of the plan that is here now. The government, unfortunately, can't take it on its own. The government cannot borrow. The developer wants to do this $360 million project. The developer says that the project is not viable unless that road is built. The developer has stepped forward and says, listen, I will go and I will borrow the money. I will stand full responsibility for the money. All I'm saying, asking you in return is, during the course of our development, whatever concessions we would have normally gotten, let those concessions, by way of import duty, let those concessions go towards paying back the loan. During the time that the loan has to be paid back over 15 or 20 years, whatever the exact amount of time when the financing is finalized, then whatever else is needed to be put into the equation, then we will all sort it out together. And the government will not renege on that. The government is saying yes, because it's going to be our road. It's not your road. It's for the country. It's for the people of the country.
Okay.
So that's what we're saying. But I don't mean to prolong, but it's hard to be totally specific to say to you how that $15 million will be derived. Because some might come from private sector, some might come from government coffers. The development that we know as the Ironwood development might extend itself further. I don't know.
Fair enough. Thank you.
So.
Okay. Just a quick question for Ms. Pineda, if I may. Or you?
Mrs. Bradley would like to say something before we move on to some new area of questions.
Thank you. I would like to stress to the press how important this agreement with the Trust is. I've been with the Trust since its foundation, and it's the first time we've ever sat down with government and negotiated for something that really affects Trust land. And I congratulate the Premier and the Minister, because it is historic as far as I'm concerned. So, and just if I may, have you got a map?
You want to map up, Ms. Patricia?
Yeah. Well, you've got this one. Let me do this bit first. You've heard about the mastic and where we're negotiating next. The government has agreed to discuss this.
Ms. Patricia, please don't be mad. Get that big one.
Yeah, that's
Camera can't pick that up.
Camera's not going to be able to pick up that small one so well. That one hurt.
Thank you. Why this proposed road is so important to move is, can you hear me? Is because it cuts through the Salina and it cuts through the Collier's Wilderness Reserve. And as I hope you know, the National Trust is responsible for looking after the endemic blue iguana, and there's naturally worldwide interest, as this is one of the rarest species in the world, and this is its habitat. And so the government, as you can see, have agreed to consider discussions, as we've had over the mastic, in this area, which is it's marvellous that we can actually now talk and explain why things are important, and with the Roads Authority, why we can get movement as opposed to just being faced with, this is the way it stays. And over here, the mangrove acts like a blanket around the outside of the mastic reserve. The mastic reserve is dry forest, and then it's got this blanket of mangrove forest, and this is what keeps it growing, and it supplies the water, and it supplies non-fragmented habitat right round. And so it was extremely important for that bit that the road was moved. That would have been devastating. It's parrot breeding habitat, it's everything is in there. And so we're losing a very small part of the land, and which will be compensated by Crown land. So just to emphasize that I think this is a very special agreement.
Thank you, Mrs. Bradley. Any further questions?
That actually answers what I was going to ask.
Just slightly more detail with regards to the actual trail itself, which obviously now there is going to be the road going either over, under, round, I don't know. Have you got a preference, and are we talking about that? I mean, obviously this involves the developer, because the developer is going to be...
We've discussed it, and we lose the trailhead that we have at the present. That bit of land that we own will be lost. But the developer has agreed to give us a cut off the road at a roundabout and to take
So
us.
we're redirecting the trail slightly.
Yeah, the
rather
trailhead
than
will be redirected.
okay.
Yeah, it'll
Up-
just
above
go
the road.
up further north from where it
Yeah.
is currently.
Yeah.
Oh, I get you. Okay.
So
It will actually go through.
It
a
is
portion.
going through the trail, yes. But that bit of land that it goes through is less important than the mangrove forest that
And-
we've moved.
Wendy, just to say to you, and I hope I'm not getting into trouble with anybody here, but the portion that is south of where the road is supposed to go now, of the trail that existed, the Mastic Trail, that portion served the purpose of allowing where they had a piece of property leased for parking to from where that property was leased up to where the actual trail will begin from the road now. That was the purpose of that, and that was not really in any wetlands. So where the roundabout will go on the road, as has been agreed by way of the new gazetted route, proposed gazetted route, you will have a left off and a left on right at that roundabout, and I think they will probably have, and they will have parking, they meaning the National Trust, will have parking in close proximity there, and perhaps a little information booth or whatever the developer has agreed to provide them. So people will simply come off of the road, left off, and then when they are finished with their mastic exercises, then they go back onto it, left on again.
But walkers won't be crossing the main road, or
No,
No.
we will
No.
have.
No, there will.
sorry, so the walking part will be diverted. So right now, where we go walking, like as you say, we leave the cars up by where
Yep.
back of the fire station and then walk. We're actually going to be starting perhaps in a different point, but once you're on the trail, it's wilderness, and we're going to, as it always has been. Okay.
That's right. That's right.
Yes, and just to clarify, we actually do own that piece of land on the southern portion. But as you correctly identified, it's not particularly environmentally sensitive.
Yeah, I was speaking, but I'm going way back. Initially, when
Right.
the land was leased
Okay,
to provide the parking, and then you
right.
made a path up to where the actual trail
Yes.
started.
Yes. So like the minister was saying, it's not actually particularly environmentally sensitive, and it is actually we did not declare that bit inalienable, so we are able to sell that if anybody wants to buy it.
Just a quick question, how much land will the trust actually get? How much will the government be giving to the trust? Is it a quarter of an acre, less than, do we know figures on that?
You
At
would
this
have
point,
to ask
yeah.
a question that we don't have the answer for.
Yeah.
That's my job.
It's about equal. We lose. The loss is about the same as the gain.
Right. Do we know?
Acre, 2 acre,
Yeah,
two,
something like that. Okay.
2 or 3. I haven't got it exactly. 2 or 3 acres.
Yeah, we haven't got. and
Please get that map.
I'm sure it's fine.
Please get that map.
I just want to point out also there is a bit of crown land that you
Yes.
know that we know that can be directly transferred. So that's
Right,
all we know
that's
for
what-
sure at this point.
All right. Okay. Edward, just indicate from the roundabout, the green section on the north side, which is Crown Land, I believe. Is it?
The other bit, Tammy, the other. No, this,
The smaller,
the one with the numbers on it.
the rounded bit.
Thank you.
I think I could see it. That bit right there.
Yeah. So what we are saying is that when we go, since you really want me to put my foot in my mouth this morning, the two green sections on the north side, just past the roundabout and then going up towards the loop, Crown owns some of that, not absolutely not all of it. So whenever we're talking about land acquisition, what we will probably seek to obtain, if negotiations can sort itself out, is to let the National Trust be in a position that the road will be the boundary of all of their reserves going all the way up, instead of having land in between that. That would be the ideal option, and that's what we would seek to achieve. But what I wouldn't like to do is to sit here this morning, give that commitment, and say no matter what happens, and then somebody says, I don't care what you say, my land is worth $50 million because it's ransom value. But given everything holding normal, that's what we would hope to achieve during the entire process. All right?
Edward, just a quick question as well. 2 lanes all the way up, and there was a press release a couple of weeks ago about resurfacing of the Hartwell bypass, or the Linford-Pearson Highway, and that it wasn't completely finished. How do we make sure that that doesn't happen to this portion of the road as well?
Well, let me answer the Linford-Pearson Highway one first, and the rationale behind what we're doing is with the Linford-Pearson is that I think we paved that back in 2001, 2002, and essentially what should have happened was we should have gone back over the course of the years and applied an additional surface to it, and because we've gotten concerns from the press as well. It said, well, why are you digging up a perfectly good road and then replacing it? While it may look to some persons, to sort of the untrained eye, that the road is actually in good condition, it's really not. And there were very detailed signs of, or very telltale signs of distress on that road. And so what we had to do is, in the case with the Linford-Pearson Highway, any type of road like that, you can't surface over something that's bad underneath, because then if we put a fresh layer of hot mix on top of that, then what will happen is that as the surface that's there now continues to deteriorate, it will cause reflection, cracking. It will cause the new surface to also deteriorate. So you have to
build on a bad foundation.
You can't build on a bad foundation, exactly. And so that's the rationale behind that. In the new budget year, 14-15, then what we will do then is resurface. We will attempt to resurface the entire road. If the funds allow, we will then resurface
But
all
the
of
fixed portion had to happen first.
Yes, we have to do that.
So to make sure that this particular road, you just have to make sure you put a resurfacing on.
We just have to
after
do
2
that.
years.
You know, and as in any case, it's always an issue of budget and, you know, and how those things play out.
But you're going to build it wide enough to handle 4 lanes, and it'll be 2 lanes to begin with?
Yes, we will do that. We won't have the same, we're not sure yet what the cross-section is going to look like. We're working that out, but the ultimate build-out capacity of this will be for 4 lanes. We're still sort of negotiating or trying to figure out what would be the best configuration, whether it's 2 lanes together in the middle or do it like we did with the current.
If I may add,
Yes.
the gazetted, just quickly, the gazetted area will certainly be able to accommodate 4 lanes.
Yes.
Along with your median. There has been much debate because the cheapest way is to build the 2 lanes
together
alongside each other.
Yeah.
Just as the bypass between Commander Bay and A.L. Thompson is.
What we call the Hartwell area.
If you notice, we've had, over the years, several tragic accidents there. So some of us are of the view that even if it's a little bit more costly, you should have 1 lane on one side, your median in the middle, and a lane on the other side, so that the natural tendency of speeding and overtaking and oncoming traffic might not be the case and would not be. Premier, I know, feels very strongly about that, so we're hopeful that that thought will not, by way of simple additional costs, be too prohibitive to make it happen. But that's what we'd like to do at the beginning, if you understand what I'm saying.
Totally understand.
And then there are other things in the wings which even water and that kind of stuff, we'd like to be looking at possible infrastructure going in very early, rather than making it look pretty and then digging it up and then having to go all over it again. So all of those things are in the whole thought process as we go along.
And my final question this morning is with regards to the financing again, and just to follow up on James's question, the road is going to take about 2 years to be finished?
I think that's what we said.
Once it starts, we assume that.
About 2 years. So with the financing being a 20-year loan and there being a difference of $40 million to build the loan, only 20-something million coming from the developer. How does it get paid for?
To reiterate the point that the minister made a number of times before, the financing for this is the responsibility of the developer. So funding the finance payments over the course of the loan are a matter for them, not a matter for government. Our challenge now is getting a structure in place, a financing structure in place, which accords with all of the things that the UK are insisting on, so that this isn't written in the government's balance sheet as a loan. So that's the challenge that we're facing now. Well, we faced from the beginning, but with this hurdle surmounted now, that we have agreement about the course of the road, we can move, I think, a bit more aggressively on the other front.
But if I might just add, because I was thinking for a second of your question, and I'm thinking part of your question speaks to the 2 years while the road is being built.
Correct.
And I'm saying to you, like most loans, as you draw down, it is structured in such a way that you begin your payments once you've completed your drawdown. So I don't anticipate any difficulty during that process. But whatever that circumstance is, the developer is totally responsible for that, because the developer is who is organizing that financing. But I suspect that what I just said will be the case, just as is the normal way in most instances. It's just like somebody getting a mortgage and they're building a house. If you're buying the house and the house is already built, different matter. Once you close, then you begin your payments. But if it's under drawdown, there might only be accrued interest during that interim that they might have to deal with. Okay?
Can I just ask a final question?
Yeah, I have to wind it up because the governor is coming in for a conference and can't keep her waiting.
All right, okay. I'll make it
You
very
harass
quick.
us, but you won't harass her.
I will if you like. Give me something
I'm
to harass her
teasing.
on and I will.
I'm teasing.
I don't have a problem. No, seriously, because we're talking about roads and just because it has been quiet again for quite some time, is there any news with regards to the DART negotiations as far as the road is concerned down by the new hotel? And also, is there any, we're hearing there's more talk about them wanting to build another one now, a second hotel where they're still pressing on the 50% duty. So can you give us any update basically on DART talks with government?
We've made no progress.
Thank you. Nice and clear.
We'd like to be able to say we did, but one side can see one side, but the other side can't see that side up to now.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay.
Have a wonderful day.